Okay, many of you might be aware already, and if you're not, I hate to be the person to tell you, but Eddie Van Halen has passed away here in October of 2020. He was born in 1955. He's from the Netherlands. His parents are from there and stuff, and had grown up here in America. Started learning musical things. His parents had a musical somewhat background, and there's a lot of people that know about that. I'm not going to try to give a biography in any way on the guy, but just kind of like what I know about him, and he touched my life, maybe to share along with somebody and just put it out there because he meant a lot to my life. When I was a little kid, I got a guitar probably about 3 years before they came out as a band, and I had already started learning music. My brother got old enough to be in working and have a car, and started working with a guy locally that was a real good guitarist and everything. Now I'd gotten a Les Paul, and it was like a burgundy color. And then come to find out, he had a Les Paul custom 1974 gold plated, blah blah blah, very nice, and a Marshall stack. That was kind of real different, and it kind of gave another push to the idea because I just had this little BS amplifier at the time, and I couldn't pull off the things that they pulled off. And of course, with Eddie, it made everybody want to get a whammy bar, but also to get some of the effects that he had, because some of the songs that he did could only be pulled off like with a phaser, making it go chow 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 chow. You could only get that effect with it. And he had a couple of different ones, and he would use them hooked up to each other, and of course kick on this one if you wanted to do the slow, and kick on that one if you wanted to do the fast, louder one, and so on in situations. Of course, that got controlled by a whole series of mechanisms after that point, but at first he was working on a lot of things in stomp pedals, and you can see him working on stomp pedals and things in his old days. In fact, there's a video that comes to mind one time where he kind of missed his little mark there on it from jumping around and playing around. But they were always known as a party band. I kind of grew up with them, and I was already learning, Ted Nugent songs and all kinds of different music by the time that they had come out. But whenever he hit, that was just something totally different. A lot of his lead solos were very intricate, and they sounded totally different. They had a different searing type of sound, but then his overall tone was, everybody calls it the brown tone, but it had a smooth kind of full tone that they had gotten on it. And they figured out now what causes all that. Everybody knows him from this guitar right here, where it's all, I don't know, what would you call it, candy striped or pinstriped guitar that was originally, uh, well, I forget what it is. Somebody recently, I watched a video even about this where they had taken the original guitar, I guess it was red, and then they painted it uh, white, or no, black, and then put stripes on it that were white, and then came over the top of that, restriping again, and painted it red over the whole top of that. And it's known as the Frankenstrat because it's not even a body that matches with a neck and things like that. And of course, they did a lot of work on it. And so he was a pioneer, and because he became famous, a lot of companies were wanting to work with him and so on. And there were people coming out with things like the headstock that you see up there, where it has that big black bar at the very end of it. This is a locking mechanism for, until this point, whenever you play with the whammy bar at all. In fact, if you just had a guitar with a whammy bar and you played around and bent the strings a lot, it would go out of tune because it was all hooked up to the springy thing. And so people would file down the nut up there a little bit, and they would put Teflon spray in there. WD-40 was the key one that a lot of people used, and they'd wipe down the strings with that and stuff like that too, to help keep them from rusting to a point. But whenever you get that locking top nut, all of a sudden it just locked on there. In fact, they were able to just cut off that whole headstock looking appearance up there and do away with it. But one key point to this was, the reason he used that one is that all the strings as they come off the end of the neck are pretty much staying in line. They're not bent out either way, and so on like that. And that's what helped to keep it in tune before they even came up with that locking top nut. For this is really kind of like the second or 2.2 variation on this guitar. And we'll talk about that in a minute onto it too. But this is the way I want to remember him. Not even as an older guy that finally cut his hair off, or the crew cut look that he has here recently with the peppered type appearance that he had that everybody saw. But what I grew up with and what he was famous for, most famous for, and made his cuts with. I ended up seeing him at about this same time. Well, I got to see Van Halen quite a few times, but it was real popular to see them in the early 80s through the 80s was really their heyday, and they got another good pump going again whenever they got with Sammy Hagar. I kind of didn't ever agree with that because I liked Sammy Hagar and his work all alone. He had just made VOA and stuff and put out a song that was on the soundtrack to Heavy Metal, the movie, and stuff that was totally separate from this thing. And I realized that he was a great singer, and now they could do something totally different than the way they had done for David Lee Roth. You know, it's not that he wasn't a good singer, but he was quite the showman type and so on. And, you know, people have made a comment here on one of these videos that I was watching. It's like, with the weebly wobbly type of music that Eddie Van Halen and his brother made together, you try to sing over the top of that and see if you don't come up with something that's going to be a whole lot worse than what Van Halen ever did all the way through those albums. So they had Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2, and then let's just go down here and look at a little more pictures. And so you're seeing this is probably at Van Halen 2 or Fair Warning type. And this is a different guitar if they don't have it in black and white. This was actually one of my favorite, if not my favorite, even though the other one has Prestige. For this one was kind of a deep blue with yellow stripes on it. Had a different look to it. Here he was just recently on Billboard magazine, and they call him the last guitar god. And that's weird because in my essence, sure, they had Hendrix and things, and he died early, so then everybody had to put that on him. But this was somebody that was actually the first guitar god of a whole new era where people came out of that were, hey, eventually somebody even better, Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and a handful of people that people could name are probably a better, more accomplished guitarist and all these things. And I had an extreme affinity for Randy Rhoads before he passed. And then, of course, his passing caused a devastation, much like Hendrix. This really wasn't something that was along that line, though, because he had lived a good full life. He, from what I hear, tried for a while to use a pick that was metal, and he kept putting the pick into his mouth. Now, he had all those picks stuck to his guitar all the time, that if he ever lost one or if he wanted to throw one out in the audience, he'd grab another one real quick. They had them on mic stands and things, too. But he would constantly put it in his mouth and one side of his mouth, and he got a cancer on his tongue in that side of his mouth. Well, they ended up getting rid of that. But then it came back and it was through his throat, and he had 2 different operation sets that they were all real hush-hush about, and they kind of thought they had gotten it. And then they supposedly ran him through a set of chemo and everything here last at the end to try to get rid of it, and it had already run rampant on him. I don't want to dwell upon that, though. That's the taking out of a man that really could have gone a much farther state, but in his 60s. So somewhere being martyred as a young man and living out a full life, if you will. Most people know him for this guitar right here. A lot of people have never seen the back of it, but in some of the old concerts, and I've been to a few of them, he used to take and flip it up, and if they had the spotlight on him, it would shine off of these things. So it's pretty neat. He has another variation of this that has different stripes on it, and it says 5150 across the bottom of it, and that's a different guitar, different headstock, but the headstock on this changed like 3-4 times through its iterations, and would you believe it or not, but this guitar from the original, everybody remembers this blurred out shot that's like that looks like he's on fire. That's the same guitar. You can see some of the same black stripes and the striping in here, and it is the same thing. It's just they came over the top of this and with another red by taping off a lot of the spots that they wanted to keep and didn't do the other. I almost like this better but it's only 2 colors and not quite chaotic enough that this one turns into. Everybody went crazy about it, but also he got real popular during that time. It's a famous shot of him where he would always do jumping across the stage while he's playing. Not too many people upgrade guitars or do weird things to guitars, but one other one that's known is Zakk Wylde, for he's known for bullseyes. I guess he's known for pinstripes. And here's another famous picture here that's got his pinstripe guitar and pants to match it. Here in later days, way after he had done the Steinberger guitar that does have the headstock cut off like you could do with that Floyd Rose tailpiece now, everything lined up, is they made a car for him that had the same thing, and it's like you got the whole matching setup. It's pretty cool. Something he's known for. There are people still around, like Jimmy Page. No, everybody hopes that he just goes on and lives forever. It's whenever he was promoting a guitar here recently. See, look at this shot over here. I don't know, it's almost out of where you can't see it, but you see that 5150 right below the tailpiece where the whammy bar is, and that was a different guitar. And if you look, it's got a hockey stick headpiece. This is a Kramer. I ended up owning a Kramer. It was exactly like this, but it wasn't painted like this. It was painted a special color they'd come up with called Midnight Mauve Lipstick. And what it was kind of a reddish purple guitar, kind of mauve, if you will, but it had a mist over it that was a pearl that was blue and purple also. So in certain lights it would look burgundy, certain lights it would look red, certain lights it would look blue, certain lights it would look purple. It was kind of a weird color changing thing they'd come up with, and it actually took kind of stage lights for this like thing to happen. But anyhow, it's pretty neat. Here's an old Van Halen motif that I guess took inspiration from the old Bombers and how they would paint the women on the side of Bombers, but a little different. Jimmy Page. My brother had posters of Jimmy Page and skateboarders, even some bodybuilders and Arnold and things like that up on his walls. It was a thing whenever I was a kid for a lot of guys girls too, to take pictures out of magazines and just take and staple them on your walls and make collages. Well, a lot of times it would try to be somewhat choreographed, and in certain areas would have certain things, and you just staple them to your walls. Well, it was a hell of a thing whenever you wanted to paint your room and how you had to take everything off. But it wasn't just posters. You would fill in around the posters and encroaching on the posters with other pictures taken out of magazines and things. I had a lot of albums, like I had 2 different albums of Dark Side of the Moon, and so I could connect them together. And if you've ever seen people do it, that makes it go light into a prism, rainbow, rainbow into a prism, into light. I had that on my wall and a few other ones. But anyhow, really probably my favorite album that they ever came up with was Fair Warning. For some reason, the stuff that was on there seemed like it had a whole lot of different, and they had put things together. And later I found out that a lot of the first 2 albums were other songs, and they had pieced them together and done things with the producers. There was only a couple that were like that on Fair Warning, and I loved some of the things that they had. I will always consider him to be the atomic punk. Nobody rules these streets at night but me. Nobody but Eddie Van Halen. If you remember that song, that starts out with that flanger and the phaser, and he's got the... Yeah, well, you had to have a thing to make that sound. And when he goes, well, that takes a whammy bar. So it made people want to get this type of thing and see what they could do with it also. David Lee Roth, and here's always a famous photograph right over here on the left where David Lee Roth's looking over the top, and he goes, sure, this is a hell of a band, but look at this guy right here shining. For he really was a firecracker, man. Whenever he was on stage, he was always moving. It was pretty much a lot of action. They ended up started wearing, weird outfits like you saw at first and stuff, and spandex with David Lee Roth and all these things, and then you saw hair bands do it later, but that wasn't the same, was it, guys? No, because it wasn't Van Halen. It's kind of weird But there's that guitar again. It's kind of weird, but Van Halen was almost like, I don't know, the Beach Boys of our day, or the Led Zeppelin, if you will. Here's an old shot of Ted Nugent jamming Stranglehold, or one of the songs, the lead they have there. Remember seeing him in concert, swinging down in on a rope, had a foxtail on and things like that. So Jimi Hendrix died too early. Freddie Mercury still died too early, but had an extensive career. And you really think Hendrix did too. Well, so did Eddie Van Halen. Are you gonna? Wow, it lost the page. I sat here for too long looking at pictures and thinking thoughts, guys. Now put down in the comments what you can think of or perhaps remember about him. But I remember a lot of things, but this is the way I kind of want to remember him. Being that guitar god of that age right there that really made a difference. Here he is in that Hot for Teacher video, and there's his doppelganger as a kid. Come to find out, he really wasn't that kind of a kid. There's that guitar again. David Lee Roth, back in the day. That looks like maybe Diver Down, Panama type era. His solos were quite unique. He almost used every effect that was possible that they could have used on him, or that he could have utilized. I had a very first amp that I was talking about earlier, I had a tremolo on it. For there was some songs like Crimson and Clover and so on that would use that, and nang, 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 and it would report out. It wasn't really like a delay, which would do it in an echo and go away, for it would just be constant on your very first initial sound. You know what I'm talking about. It had a reverb on it. That was quite useful, but he never did anything that was quite like a tremolo. But then all of a sudden he came out with Cathedral, and that's where he's got that song that, well, it kind of sounds like cathedral music. And you're like, what is this? Is this a keyboard or whatever? When you saw him in concert, you could tell that he was doing it by using his volume knob real quick in conjunction with his hands in timing, making up something that sounded more like keyboards out of his guitar. And I remember when first time I saw him on it, you couldn't tell what was going on. I was too far away. But the next time, they had the screens up and close-ups and everything. You're like, what the hell? It was amazing. Here's Hendrix, and he's dressed up in the gaucho type thing. I've come for the one they call Bieber. So, we've still got Ozzy around, but there's been quite a few catastrophes in music, like Leonard Skinner. I mean, it goes way, way back on things that have happened in rock and roll. And I wouldn't consider that to be one of those tragedies in any way. Look at him, just wah. I wouldn't consider that to be a tragedy, for he was able to be around with us much longer than many. When I was a kid, though, man, there was Valerie Bertinelli was on that show. What was it called? Oh God! And they were in the apartment thing, and their mom and stuff. And oh, I used to know all their name. Mackenzie Phillips was her sister in that endeavor, and they ended up getting married and had a kid. And their kid plays, say, named Wolfgang or Wolf, ends up playing bass with them in the last few times that I've seen them, in the place of Michael Anthony due to what happened there. I guess, well, it's up in the corner here, but here we see the original one laid over the top of the 5150, and here we got the Steinberger headless and pretty much bodiless type of body. But if you think about it, that's the only part that really matters. But doesn't it look so weird to have a guitar like that? To me, it really seemed weird just to have one without a headstock. This is the way that we remember him, though. This is like in Jump or Panama or something. And this was during a different age. This is whenever they had like ZZ Top and Eliminator and all those things. If you haven't familiarized yourself, I would behoove you to just jump around and look at something, hey, listen to Atomic Punk. Just put in Atomic Punk Van Halen and listen to that thing kick after this is over with. But it's one of my favorite songs, but I couldn't begin to pin it down, for each one has its own little thing for me. But at their heyday, whenever they were kicking in and taking on another notch and another notch, that seemed to be the one. Here you can see a collection of guitars. There's the one I'm talking about. Well, it's just out of frame where you can't see it. This weird yellow thing is right in front of it. There's a Les Paul. There's other guitars that he had there, but he's famous for those. Such a young picture. Here they are back in the early 80s. And they're a band that had an impact that was, you can only compare it to something like Led Zeppelin and stuff. Boston had an incredible career. My brother was incredibly enamored with them, and they had a fantastic career. It still got overshadowed by them. My first inkling, by the way, I went off on it last time I was talking about it, was that Black Sabbath was coming on Never Say Die tour. And they ended up getting paired with them. And by the time they had reached and even made the tickets, it said Black Sabbath versus Van Halen. There wasn't too many shows after that Ozzy quit, and somebody said that he said if somewhere no better band can come out of LA like that and blow us off the stage, there's something problem with that. And in reality, they were Van Halen. And it was really the party band for growing up of my age. And music has changed so much, there isn't really a band like that if you think about it today. I mean, somebody could say, oh, Chili Peppers and this, that, and the other. No. Yeah, it's Chili Peppers. They'd be like, well, no, we're not like that. So I liked what they did with Sammy Hagar again, but my first inkling was with David Lee Roth. And hey, sometimes when I'm researching, get tired of doing it, I click over on the side, and sometimes I try to find an old concert I didn't get to see or one that I did. Try to have old memories. And it wasn't too long ago whenever I found this, and I was going through some Eddie Van Halen stuff, and I found a video where they have tried to recreate this guitar to a T. They had a hold of it, and they figured out which layer went on where, exactly where it is, and everything else situation, and they've made copies of these for people to come out. So it wasn't long ago. In fact, just a couple of days ago, there's a guy that, oh my God, I forgot his name now, after talking so much about everything else. Anyhow, Russo, he makes videos about music and so on, and I've watched a few of them, and he did a video where they said, well, what would it sound like if Stairway to Heaven's lead guitar part was made by Eddie Van Halen or Peter Frampton or maybe even Eric Johnson, the guy that I'm familiar with from being down in Austin and stuff. But he has a unique style, and they had somebody play in representative of Eddie, and Frampton, of course, is the part that he played. And this had just come out a couple of days ago, man. So it's just kind of weird. But I knew that he had been in rough state. I don't know if y'all have been paying attention or not, but you saw him, and he had really looked kind of rough a while ago, and then all of a sudden was looking better and everything. And you're like, okay, that was just a little rough thing. And then he got real rough at one point. People say that, oh, he got hooked up on drugs or he did this, that, and the other. And looking back on it, that's whenever he went through that chemo thing right there, and it just ate him alive right there pretty much. But he came back from that pretty good too, until the cancer really got going everywhere, apparently. I'm not sure exactly on the particulars about it, but I just heard about it on another video and started getting nostalgic and thought I'd put something out there. I remember having a dream whenever I was a kid that they broke down under their car on the highway and came to visit me. Well, not to visit me, but came down my street looking for some help, and I ended up helping. My mom got him a tow truck and everything for him, and Eddie sat and played it on my guitar at the time, and it was weird, but it was like vivid and stuff. But I don't want to go into that. But that was like one of those dreams that, like, You could easily remember after I woke up. In fact, years later, I still remember pretty much most of it. But yeah, they were the voice of a generation almost for the kids growing up in my school and especially my neighborhood and everybody I hung around with them. You definitely had a Van Halen 8-track, and then you had them in cassette, and then you had them on CD. And it's probably going to be something you're going to be hearing on the radio a lot here for the next couple of weeks. It'll somewhat fade away. Hell, it blew me away years ago whenever I put it on the oldies station. Yeah, it's where they play classics. And all of a sudden Van Halen kicks on, and I'm like, what? Oh, well, it's over 25 years. Wow. I'm getting old. That's old. But now we're way past that, too. Isn't that amazing? Time flies. But I like to remember him as the guitar god that he was. And they say last of the guitar gods. I wouldn't say so. There's still a lot of them that are around that are from this generation that came directly from this. But I'd say that he was the original of the modern guitar gods. The modern bard, the incredible virtuoso of guitars was Eddie Van Halen. Rest in peace. 1955 to 2020. Peace.